I'm going to share a little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me, and I apologize for our frequent travelers. You will have heard this before, and you can just get your scotch ready for the tour or do something else while I'm introducing myself. My name is Mara Walsh. I'm in the United States, specifically between Philadelphia and New York. So I'm in the Eastern time zone. All of our tours are set in the Eastern time zone. So as you get used to these, you know that you do have to convert them to your local time zone. I started leading physical tours with my travel partner EF Tours as a Girl Scout leader, taking girls and their families to international destinations every summer. I've since expanded my travel program, and I've included adult-only tours as well as family-friendly tours. But in the recent months, I have begun offering virtual tours. There's a couple reasons I started this virtual tour series. One, I really wanted to support the tour director community during this time of travel restrictions and their unemployment. They have not worked since at least February of last year, and some of them for more than a year now. So I wanted to support them, but I also really wanted to keep the excitement of travel alive for my travel group. And I extended that opportunity to those of you who have learned about us through friends and family and social media and other means. So welcome everybody. My physical tours are educational in nature and include a ton of history as well as sightseeing. So that is why I decided to simulate our tours in this way, to offer virtual tour presentations with the concentration of history and the sights and the stories behind them. We understand that the pictures do not bring the sights to life the way that you are when you are physically traveling, but we are doing our best to simulate a tour and the journey that we take when we're on the ground touring with a tour director. You know, we've done several tours in the past months, and if you've missed them, you can access them through my website, girltraveltours.com. There's a virtual tour drop-down menu, and all of the tours that we've recorded are up there for people to participate in. We also are looking forward to many more tours in the future. Some of those include Alaska, Vienna, Berlin, the Canadian Rockies, Gaudi's Barcelona. We have other tours that are not up there yet for registration, but will be up by December 1st. And those are including Amsterdam, Florence, Tuscany, a World War II European tour, Scandinavia, Santa Fe, Switzerland. I'm actually going to share a list while I'm talking because I think it's easier to see while you hear me as opposed to just me reading them off. Iceland, Mystery in the Orient Express, a look at the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and so many more. So I think that we will be able to continue our journeys together well into the new year. As long as you're interested in viewing these tours, we will continue to produce them. I know my tour director friends are happy to be able to ignite their desire to share their homelands and their favorite countries with you, as I am happy to bring them to you. So there are many ways to connect with us today on this tour. One, you can chat me and I will get those chats and I will do my best to respond to them. So you can use the chat mechanism for that. I see tons of you chatting from where you're from tonight. So welcome everybody. I know that we have a lot of people who are up very late at night, like our tour director. And then there are people from down under that are waking up and having their coffee with us. I hope that they'll be ready to spike their coffee with some scotch for this tour. So I know you're all over the globe and welcome. And I know that there's a lot of people on Facebook that are joining us. So welcome. Today we have ways to ask us questions. So if you want to ask a question to the tour director so that he can address it in our rapid fire Q&A after the tour, please put them in the questions mechanism in Zoom, and we'll make sure that George gets to them after the presentation. And then lastly, there's one way we like to interact, and if you're on Facebook, you can chat this in the comments, but if you're on Zoom, please look for the poll. We're going to launch a poll right now, and we want to know, what is your connection to the Highlands of Scotland? I've been and loved it. I have a trip booked. I plan to go in the future. I have no plans right now, but I'm considering it for the future, and I'm solely interested in virtual travel. So we have a ton of people here today, and I'm going to wait for at least 50% of them or so to get their answers in. But I know that for me, I would be answering that. I would be answering several, even though you're not allowed. But I would say I loved it. I have a trip booked because I am going back to Scotland in the future, and I have been and loved it. So there's multiple ones. So please take a moment. I'm going to end the poll as we collect more data. But it looks like most people have either been and loved it or they plan to go in the future. There's also a ton of people who don't have plans solidified but are looking to make those plans. And I know that George will change your opinion and you will solidify those plans after your tour with him today. So let's get right down to it. I'm going to take the poll off so that we can get into it. And I know that you're probably tired of listening to me and you want me to hand this over. But I will say, regardless of how much you know about the Highlands of Scotland at this point, I hope that we enhance that today on this virtual tour. A tour would not be complete without a fantastic tour director. A tour director is like a personal travel concierge who stays with your group from start to finish and shares a world of knowledge, manages all your travel plans, and makes sure your experience is stress-less and full of positive experiences, allowing you to make the most of your journey and build lifelong memories. I know that probably a lot of you out there do solo traveling, so you may not understand the importance of a tour director, but I just, I challenge you one time, just go on a group tour. It's an amazing, different perspective. And I honestly find that touring with people is awesome. And I love to meet people along the way, and the value of a tour director taking you through just is something that I didn't realize when I used to travel without one. So instead of my guidebook, I just have my tour director, and that works out really well for our group. If we're not traveling, our tour directors are not working. So this is why, one of the reasons why I decided to do these. So I will be chatting in the comments later on. If you're so inclined and you are enjoying the tour, there is a way to leave George a tip, and I'll facilitate that for him and make sure that he gets that. 100% of our, well, I should say all of our tips go to the tour director minus our Zoom expenses. So please know that I'm not taking anything out of this. I'm doing this for the good of travel and for the good of our tour directors. Your tips do go directly to the tour directors. I'm hoping that this virtual tour will reignite the desire to travel. I know it's been a long time. My last trip out of the country was in February, and I expect that most of you are in that same realm, and it could have been even before that. So before I hand over this event to our tour director, I just want to say out there in Facebook land, please be diligent and help one another. There's a lot of scammers out there who are unscrupulously putting up fake copycat events and pages to imitate ones that are legitimate. And if you could just make sure that your friends and other people on Facebook are not succumbing to their lure in to get credit card information, please help us out there and share that information. Never give a credit card to enter a free event. My virtual tour presentations do not require credit cards. You can always safely access my events through my website, girltraveltours.com, and or view my Facebook page, which has facebook.com Girl Travel Tours. There are a lot of copycats out there, and it's very hard to distinguish them. So back to the virtual tour. So today, George, I think I've given you enough time to get ready. I am honored to introduce you to and hand over this event to one amazing tour director and my friend straight from Scotland, George McFall, McPhersland. No, I'm sorry, I'm just teasing. George McFall. So George, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you are going to take it over. Take us away, George.
Okay. Hi, everybody. How you doing? I'm going to share my screen. Okay. How are you all? Is this working? Yeah. Okay. From the beginning. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. And oops, where are we? Bear with me, sorry about this. Okay, there we are. Hi, everybody, welcome. My name is George McFall. I am a tour director for EF and other companies as well. Yeah, thank you very much to Mara for asking me back to do this tour of Scotland's Highlands. And we're briefly going to go to the islands as well. I just want to double check this is working. Mara, can you see me okay?
George, we can see you, but we're not seeing your screen yet.
Ah, okay. Bear with me. That's strange. Okay, share screen.
You're coming on now, George, so you're good.
Okay, there we are. That working?
Yes. You
okay,
are
good. Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. Welcome to. I'm in Edinburgh, in Scotland, just now. My name is George McFall, or McFly, as they called me at school. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming here. And it's a great honour to be here with you. Thank you so much to Mara for organising this. As she said, she does this purely from enthusiasm and kindness alone. So I'm very, very grateful. I never leave enough time for these tours, so I'm going to push on as quickly as I can, because normally this tour we would have days to go around the route we're going to do, and I'm still not going to have enough time to tell you everything that I want to tell you. So anything that I don't go into in depth enough, any other questions that you have, anything that I don't go into you want to know about, please ask me in the Q&A and I'll do my best. So we're going to do a tour of the Highlands and Islands. I believe my colleague Lewis already did Edinburgh already. Edinburgh is in the lowlands of Scotland. The Highlands is in the north of Scotland and the northwest, the mountainous area, hence high. This picture here is of a very famous castle called Eilean Donan, and it's very it's very typical of the beautiful landscapes you get in the Highlands of Scotland, very romantic, the sort of thing you might get on a tin of shortbread. The Highlands of Scotland, in my opinion, is the most beautiful part of the United Kingdom. It's very underpopulated. I don't know if you guys have been to the UK before, but there's a lot of people in not a very big country compared to America, where I know you guys have a lot of space. I apologize to anybody from Canada and other countries. But in the UK, we don't have much space. So the Highlands is one of the only areas left where there's actually a lot of space. So it's a great place to go on holiday, especially if you don't like people. That's a joke. So you can see here a map of Scotland and England. Now, can you see on the map of Scotland, Edinburgh and Glasgow are down to the bottom, to the south of Scotland. That's an area that we call the Central Belt. The Central Belt is where most of the people in Scotland live. Scotland, the population is about 5 million people. And the cities of Edinburgh and Glasgow, that's where most of the people live. To the north, in the Highlands of Scotland, there's only just about 200,000 people live there. There used to be many more people there, but a lot of people left the Highlands for various reasons that we will touch on today. But a lot of it was to do with the Industrial Revolution and industrialization, and people in general moved from the countryside to the cities. So now it's a very underpopulated area of Scotland, absolutely beautiful, stunning scenery. Here's a map of just the Highlands. Okay, so that is roughly the Highlands there, roughly in the north and the west. Around the east, you have cities like Aberdeen, and then further down, you have Edinburgh. Those aren't quite in the Highlands. That's not in the beautiful mountainous area. Here you have a map of the Highlands showing you where the mountains are. So you can see roughly where the Highlands are, and you can see why the bit in the middle is called the Central Belt, because it's this strip of flat land in the middle. Now, the landscape of the Highlands is very mountainous, as you might know, and a lot of the mountains date from 3,000 million years ago. They've been there forever, but a lot of the features of the landscape was carved out during the last ice age, scenes such as these, and this is very typical of the Highlands. Once you get further north into the Highlands, there's not many trees. It's very barren. I don't know if anybody's been to Iceland, but it's kind of like what Iceland is like in some ways. Not many plants, not many trees. At one time, Scotland, the Highlands of Scotland, was covered in forest. It's called the Forest of Caledon, the Caledonian Forest. But gradually, with changing weather and also humans deforesting the country, it's gradually turned into this very barren landscape. Although we are trying to reintroduce the forest, and I'll show you a little bit later one part of the Highlands where there is still a little bit of this forest left. Okay. delving into history very briefly, you'll see this map is a map of the ancient peoples of the UK, and you'll see confusingly that the Scots are actually in Ireland, and in Scotland, where the Scots should be, there's the Picts. Okay, now the Scots were originally from Ireland, but both the Picts and the Scots were loosely speaking Celtic peoples. Okay, what we now call Celtic peoples. The Scots from Ireland went over, and the Picts and the Scots, they fought for hundreds of years. Eventually, they united under a famous king called Kenneth MacAlpine. And then to the south of them, where I am currently, Edinburgh, which is also where I'm from, you'll see, according to the old map, it's not really part of Scotland at all. It's actually part of Angleland, which is where the Angles, the Anglo-Saxons, came over from Germany and Denmark. And then to the west of there, we have the Britons, and they were the people who were here before the Anglo-Saxons, who had mixed with the Romans, etc., etc. So the lowlands, if I was from the Highlands, what I would say really is the lowlands, it's not really Scotland at all. And actually in the 10th century, Edinburgh and all the lowlands would have actually been part of England, and the natural border was this estuary, the Firth of Forth, just to the north of Edinburgh. So that's why the Angles on the east coast and the Britons and the Irish on the west coast, which is why to this day in Scotland, very generally speaking, people on the east coast of Scotland tend to be more English and Protestant, and on the west coast they tend to be more Irish and Catholic. So on the east coast you have something more like this, west coast something more like this, speaking very generally. Okay, apologies to anybody from either coast who takes offense to that. Okay, the Picts, let's talk about the Picts. All we know about them is from the Romans. Okay, we don't know anything about history before the Romans. They were the first people to write things down. And the Picts, we have a description written by none other than Julius Caesar. He describes them as painted warriors. The name Pict literally means painted, like picture. And they were painted in blue dye called woad. I apologize for the nudity, but the Picts did go into battle naked, according to Julius Caesar, in blue dye and completely naked. A look that was later adopted by Sir Mel Gibson in the film Braveheart. I think he was imitating the Pictish dye on his face. So the Romans, yes, the Romans never got, they strayed into the Highlands of Scotland, but they didn't really want to stay there for long. They fought some battles with the Picts, but they retreated to the south. They built a wall in southern Scotland called the Antonine Wall, and they never really went further north than that. But the Romans called Scotland, which at the time was the Highlands of Scotland, Caledonia, which is a name that you still hear quite often. Various companies and things like that in Scotland are called Caledonia. There's a Caledonia in Canada as well. So then after Kenneth MacAlpine united the Picts and the Celts, I mean the Scots who came from Ireland, we have basically small tribes forming in the Highlands of Scotland. And the name that we give to these tribes are the clans, okay? I'm sure you've all heard of the clans. I'm sure lots of you are members of clans that you're going to tell me about afterwards. I'm a member of the Macintosh clan. That's why I'm wearing this scarf. But the clans, it was basically like feudalism, okay, which you got everywhere in Europe. You had a warlord, basically. He acted as the king and the judge and the protectorate of that small area. And if you were a peasant, you might be allowed to live on the warlord's land, and in return for that you'd have to give him lots of your food that you grew. And also when the warlord went to war with another lord, you'd basically have to go and fight and possibly die for your warlord because he basically owned you. Okay, so it was basic feudalism. Okay, that's what it was, but we call it the clans. And you'll see here there's the clan tartans. This came a bit later. The tartan idea of Scotland was actually more of a 19th century construct. Around the time of Sir Walter Scott, they romanticized the idea of Scotland. The actual clans back in medieval times, it would have been a pretty rough bunch. They wouldn't have been going around in very decorate tartan, believe me. So here's a map of some of the clans of Scotland. Some of you might be able to spot your own surname amongst this. I know there's a lot of information to take in. You can always re-watch this video and pause whenever you want. But this is where the different clans lived traditionally in Scotland. Okay, also in the Highlands of Scotland, they spoke a language called Gaelic, which is very similar to Gaelic, Irish Gaelic, but people that speak Gaelic tend to understand Gaelic and vice versa. This shows you where Gaelic is spoken in this day and age. You can see that on this island off the west coast, which is the Isle of Lewis, more than 50% of the population speak Gaelic as a first language. Okay, and as you go east, you can see that it becomes less and less prominent as a language. Sadly, Gaelic is dying out, and English is obviously spoken. There's also Scots dialect, which is like a sort of Scottishized English, when that's used across Scotland. But yes, Gaelic is dying out. I can't speak Gaelic, I'm afraid, even though I was brought up in Scotland. The only thing I can say in Gaelic is Donny Murdo, which means danger mouse, because we had the cartoons on the Gaelic channel on TV when I was growing up. So I can say danger mouse, that's about it. But this is Gaelic. Welcome to Scotland. Fáilte gu alba. Any of you who know a little bit of Irish will recognize the word fáilte from Céad Míle Fáilte. So very similar languages, okay? The Scots, the Picts, similar Celtic tribes, similar languages. We're going to start off not in the Highlands, but in Fife, okay? And we're going to start off in Fife because I know some of you probably want to go to St. Andrews on this virtual tour. But on the way to St. Andrews, we'll talk about Fife. It's this peninsula, and it's just across the water from Edinburgh. And in Edinburgh, we're very scared of people from Fife. They have a reputation for being very mental. And we have lots of old sayings from the 17th century about people from Fife, and we're still quite scared of them. But don't worry, we're safe on this tour. On the way to St. Andrews, we're going to stop off, as requested by one of the people that's attending, in a place called Falkland. Oh, look, here's another map of Fife, and you can see Falkland here in the middle, just above Glen Rothes. And Falkland, some of you will be excited because it's where they film a lot of Outlander. All the scenes that are meant to be Inverness in Outlander are filmed in Falkland, because Inverness in real life, modern Inverness, is not very historic looking. It's not the prettiest town in Scotland, I hate to say. Apologies to anybody from Inverness. But Falkland is where they film a lot of Outlander. And actually, when you go through Falkland, quite often they are actually filming Outlander there. I'm sure we've got a lot of Outlander fans on this tour. I don't know it that well, but I'll help any way I can in the Q&A. Okay, on to St. Andrews. St. Andrews is probably, let's face it, the most famous golf course in the world, okay? It's not where golf was invented. People have been knocking balls in holes with sticks for thousands of years. In ancient Greece, they had a similar game. But St. Andrews is where the modern game of golf was basically formalized, okay? So there are 18 holes, and it's also where the modern golf course was initially set in motion by a very famous greenkeeper called Old Tom Morris. Okay, but people have been playing golf in St. Andrews since the early 1400s. And you can see why, before golf courses, it would have been a great place for playing golf, because it's basically on the sea. The beaches are huge and sandy, so the grass would have been very sandy grass, so ideal for knocking a ball around. St. Andrews also, anybody seen Chariots of Fire? That's where they run along the beach in the beginning of the film. Any fans of that? So St. Andrews, famous for golf, and here it is, the very famous old course. This was the very first 18-hole golf course, and it's also where the British Open takes place. Here's a photograph of the Open. And when you actually visit this golf course in real life, sometimes cars just drive across this golf course because it's actually common land, and cars are actually allowed to drive across the course, much to the frustration of some golfers who have waited for months in order to be able to play on this famous golf course. St. Andrews also very famous for its university. St. Andrews University, the oldest university in Scotland. It's in the same. It's like with Oxford and Cambridge. It's in that league of universities. It's incredibly old, and most of you will know it because it's where Prince William met Kate Middleton when they were both at university in St. Andrews. And here I've got a photograph here of their time together in St. Andrews University. Oh, not that one. This one here, Prince William, back when he had hair, and young Kate. They met in St. Andrews University in a cafe on the high street. St. Andrews is not a very big town. It's a very small town, but a lot of the population is students. If you, as an American, want to study at St. Andrews University, you can, but it will cost you around $40,000 a year. I know you guys have to pay a lot for your colleges, but that seems very steep to me. And if you're from Scotland and you go to university in Scotland, you don't pay anything, I'm afraid. It's all paid for by the taxpayer. Okay, so William and Kate, And what else? St. Andrew's Cross. St. Andrews is called St. Andrews because at one time there was a cathedral in St. Andrews, which you can still see the ruins of. And in this cathedral, they had what they said were relics of the apostle St. Andrew. And people in those days used to come from far and wide on pilgrimages to St. Andrews to look at these relics and to pray, because they were seen as being extremely lucky things to travel towards and pray to, like in a pilgrimage. However, Scotland, after the Reformation of 1517, became a very Protestant country, fiercely Protestant, more Protestant than England, and a very famous Protestant minister called John Knox led his congregation to St. Andrews because the Protestants didn't like relics. That was exactly the sort of thing they were against, and they demolished the cathedral. And they completely demolished it. They demolished the relics. And if it hadn't been for that, people say that St. Andrews could have turned into a major city, a major settlement like Edinburgh or Glasgow, but it wasn't. Because of the Reformation, it was torn down, and it's still just a university seaside town in Fife. Just before we get back on the bus, we're going to have some fish and chips, because St. Andrews is this very famous chippy, the best chippy in Scotland. And we're going to get fish and chips, and we're going to have a can of Iron Brew with the fish and chips. Iron Brew is our indigenous soda drink in Scotland, very popular with children. Tastes a little bit like cream soda, that sort of thing. Very sweet. One sip is okay for me, but any more, it's a bit much. Okay, so back on the bus, and we're now going to head up towards the Highlands. We're going to go through a beautiful part of Scotland called Perthshire. You see this town called Perth? We're going to head past there and up to Pitlochry. Now, as I said before, the Highlands are very desolate and barren. Some people would say bleak landscape in a very awe-inspiring way, but Perthshire is beautiful. If you want a farm in Scotland, Perthshire is where you want it, because you can grow beautiful produce. They make a lot of jam there, a lot of wheat, and it's very green, as you can see, lots of trees. It's also a great place for seeing Highland cows, which I know you'll all be excited about. You can't go to the Highlands without seeing a Highland cow. In Scotland, we call them Highland coos, which is Scots for Highland cow. Here's a nice Highland cow in front of a castle, Highland coo in front of a castle. Here is a more urban Highland cow standing in a sort of housing project with a very insecure donkey behind it. Here is a sort of crazy baby Highland cow, Highland coo. Here is a couple of emo Highland coo teenagers to coo for school, perhaps. Other animals you might find in Scotland would be this one, a little Shetland pony, lovely little pony, very hardy. They're from the Shetland Islands off the northeast of Scotland, sort of halfway between Scotland and Norway. Very cute animal indeed. The capercaillie, it's a bird that you only get in certain parts of the Highlands of Scotland, very rare. And the red squirrel, we still have red squirrels in Scotland. At one time, all the squirrels in the UK were red. However, somebody brought a nasty, aggressive grey squirrel over from America, and soon the American grey squirrels intimidated and wiped out all our lovely red squirrels. And now there's only a few red squirrels left in Scotland. But there you go. So sometimes you get to still see red squirrels. I've seen a few up in the around the Loch Ness area. Okay, at the north end of Perth, we get to this town called Pitlochry, which is a very beautiful Victorian town. Queen Victoria stayed there. Is what we called in Victorian times a spa town. Very nice place to stop for a cup of tea. This, I like to take groups down here. This is a hydroelectric dam. It might not be everybody's idea of a good time, but I really like it. And there's a lot of hydroelectricity in Scotland, where we make electricity out of water. And what's exciting about this is you can see these pools on the left that are separated. That's actually a salmon ladder. So because the salmon can't get past the hydroelectric power dam, they built a ladder up the side, so the salmon at certain times of year leaps from pool to pool, and that way they get past the dam. Very exciting. Onwards past Pitlochry and into this range of mountains, and as you can see, we're now getting into the more barren, bleak highland, and these are called the Cairngorms on the northeast of Scotland. And you can see the Cairngorms National Park here on this map. And we're going to go to a small town called Braemar for our next stop. This is Braemar. It's a beautiful village nestled amongst the Cairngorms, and we're in luck today because today is the first Saturday in September, which means we can hear lots of the sound of drums and bagpipes, because today is the day of the Braemar Highland Games. It's the most famous Highland Games in the world. It's the original one. It was officiated in around 1815, and which was the time, as I said before, that the notion of Scotland was being very romanticized by people like Sir Walter Scott, and we'd invented tartan, and we were really sort of ceremonizing the idea of Scottishness. So the Highland Games became very popular at this time. We have children here doing the Highland Fling. They look very Scottish, I'm sure you agree. We have men with pierced eyebrows doing the tug of war. And most famous of all, tossing the caber. Look at this brute. And this one. Whoa. And they toss the caber as far as they can. And look at this. Look who this is watching it. And she's usually there every year. It's one of her favorite things to do during the year is go to the Braemar Highland Games. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, seen here with her eldest son, Prince Charles, and her husband, the dastardly Duke of Edinburgh. Here's another photograph of them. Charles and his mother sharing a joke. Prince Philip suddenly realizes he's left the heating on in the castle, in the palace down the road, because the Queen lives quite nearby in this palace, Balmoral Castle. And this is one of her favorite houses that she likes to live in, and it's very near Braemar. Most of the Queen's castles and palaces don't belong to her, they belong to the British public, that's me, and we let her and her family live in them out of the kindness of our hearts. However, Balmoral Castle does belong to the royal family. It's their private residence, and it's one of the Queen's favorite houses to live in. Why is the Queen of Scotland? You may wonder. Well, we used to have our own kings and queens in Scotland, some very famous kings. Macbeth, you might have heard of the Shakespeare play. He was an actual king of Scotland. We had a lot of kings called Malcolm. We had a lot of kings called James, Mary, Queen of Scots. But at a certain point, the English Queen Elizabeth died, and she hadn't produced an heir. So at that point, her cousin, Queen Mary, Queen of Scots, her son, who was James VI of Scotland, was asked to become James I of England. And here he is, James I of England, James VI of Scotland, famous for the King James Bible. Jamestown in America, they're all named after him. And ever since then, all the kings and queens of England and Scotland have been the same. Charles was the first English Stuart king, okay? Before him, it was the Tudors. Elizabeth was the last Tudor. He was the first Stuart. And the Stuarts had a very tough time of it being kings of England. James's son, Charles I, had his head chopped off by Oliver Cromwell because basically the Stuarts were a little bit too Catholic for the English. And more on that later on, okay? So James VI of Scotland and James I of England. I'm not going to bamboozle you with too much history because it's very complicated. Anyway, next we're going to move on from Balmoral and we're going to go to a distillery to drink some whiskey. Those of us that are old enough or brave enough, okay? And Scotland is very famous for its whiskey, okay? But the people that are into posh whiskey, single malt whiskey, they all agree that the best area for whiskey is Speyside in Scotland, okay? And Speyside, oh, look, on the way to Speyside, we're going to go past this. This is the last remaining bit of the Caledonian Forest I was telling you about. The Cairngorms Mountains in the background, Caledonian Forest in the foreground. And here you can see where Speyside is compared to the Highlands. The Speyside whiskey, very famous. Also the Highland whiskey famous. You get Lowland whiskey and on the islands. And all the whiskies taste a little bit different, but the Speyside is the classic one. Here is a list of all the different Speyside distilleries that you can visit. In fact, you can't visit them all, but these are all the distilleries. So some very famous ones, Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, but we're going to visit Macallan, which on real life tours, I always choose Macallan to visit because it's a great visit. Here's the distillery, and we go in, and here's a bottle of Macallan 50 years old single malt. Single malt just means that it was made in one distillery, as opposed to blended. Cheap whiskey tends to be blended. Different whiskies from different distilleries get blended. But single malt means it's from the one distillery. I know there's a gentleman called Serge, I believe, who's wanting to match the whiskey with the distillery that we were visiting. So Serge, cheers. So Macallan, very fine whiskey indeed. Now, whiskey in Scotland requires only 3 ingredients, as I'm sure some of you know: barley, yeast, and water. Okay, that's all you need to make Scottish whiskey. At one time, originally, whiskey in Scotland, whiskey production would have just been on small farms. Okay, they would have grown barley, they would have kept cattle, they would have made a bit of whiskey from the barley, they would have fed the barley mash to the cows when they'd finished. But obviously, the scale of it has grown and grown, and now whiskey is a major, major export for Scotland. So in order to make whiskey, first you get the barley, then you have to germinate the barley by adding it with a bit of water. It starts to germinate in order to create carbohydrate, which you can then turn into alcohol during the distillation process. After you have germinated it, then you have to malt the barley. In some places in Scotland, they add a little bit of peat at this point of the process to make it taste a bit more peaty. Then you ferment it. Then you distill it in a big copper still like this. And at the point where the whiskey comes out, it's completely clear spirit. It doesn't taste of whiskey. It doesn't smell of whiskey. It isn't yellowish in color. It's a completely clear spirit. But they put it in the barrels for a minimum of 3 years for a single malt. And it's the barrel that gives it a lot of the flavor and the color as well. So 3 years is the minimum amount of time you can keep it in a barrel for a single malt whiskey. I had a picture of a cow before, because this is actually the farm on the Macallan Distillery. And once they're done with the barley mash, they feed it to the cows still, like in the old days. And these, you take my word for it, are the drunkest cows you've ever seen in your life. That's a joke. And here it is, the whiskey, as drunk by a couple of respectable Scotsmen. It gets a lot uglier than that. I'm showing you the nicer side of whiskey drinking in Scotland. As you can see, they're drinking it neat, no ice. Sometimes in Scotland you can have a little bit of water, but if you're going to drink whiskey in Scotland, you're not going to do yourself any favors by asking for a bit of Coke or cola to go with your whiskey or ice or anything like that. Okay, just to warn you. Okay, so from Speyside, we're going to head to Inverness. But on the way to Inverness, we need to stop off somewhere very, very important, and that is this place, Cullen Moore. Cullen Moore is the site of the last battle to take place on British soil. And it was essentially like a civil war in this country. And it was between the Jacobites and the King's army, the government's army, the Redcoats. You guys know all about the Redcoats, right? So Culloden, the Battle of Culloden took place in 1746. The background to it is very, very complicated. Okay, some of you have seen Outlander, things like that, and you have and some people often have a very romantic idea about the Jacobite uprising. They think it was like Scotland versus England or Catholic versus Protestant. It's more complicated than that. Okay, basically the Stuart kings, James Stuart, who I told you about before, his son was executed, then his son's son was restored to the throne, and then he died. His brother took over, but he was Catholic, so he was deposed by the British, and he ran away to France. Now, his grandson was this guy, Charles Edward Stuart, also known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, and there were a few Jacobite rebellions where the Stuarts tried to take back what they saw as their rightful throne in England and Scotland from the Protestant kings, initially William of Orange, the Dutch Protestant, and then also the Hanovers who came after him, the Georges. But Bonnie Prince Charlie came over to Scotland in 1745 to raise an army of Highlanders, because he knew that there were some Highland chiefs who were very sympathetic to the Jacobite cause. Now, different people were sympathetic to this cause for different reasons. One of the reasons was the Act of Union. So Scotland had lost its parliament in 1707 due to quite a lot of dodgy dealings, political dealings and bribery and things like that. So a lot of people in Scotland wanted their independence back from Westminster, much like today. Different people had different motives, basically. But what happened was Charlie arrived in 1745. He was greeted by about 1,000 Highlanders who joined him as his Jacobite army. And this is a map of all the different clans. And as you can see, some of them signed up for the Jacobites. Those are the ones in sort of peach color. And the green ones were actually clans that were loyal to the government troops. So it's not an English versus Scottish thing. It's not a Protestant versus Catholic thing. It's much more complicated than that. And the other thing that is worth to bear in mind, actually, is that a lot of these Highlanders that were fighting for either side were not fighting from their own free will. They were fighting because they were told that they had to by their clan chief, who was basically their feudal warlord who owned them, who basically sent them out to their death in a lot of cases. So Bonnie Prince Charlie marches south. He manages to take Edinburgh with his army, which was quite a raggle-taggle crew, it must be said. Fantastic victory at the Battle of Prestonpans, 1745. They decide to march on through England. They get about 100 miles north of London, and they lose their bottle because they think the French are going to send reinforcements. That doesn't happen. So they retreat to Scotland. The Redcoats, the government army, chase them for a while. Eventually, the two armies meet in Cullen Moore, just outside Inverness, and the Jacobites are completely wiped out by the Redcoats. It is a bloodbath. It's a very brutal, brutal battle, and a very, very sad day for the Highlands of Scotland. It's effectively the end of the Highland communities as they were before that point. Bonnie Prince Charlie, you might want to know what happened to him. He was not the romantic guy that people like to think. He ran away at the first sign of the Jacobite defeat, and managed to run away to the Isle of Skye dressed as a washerwoman, as depicted in this famous painting with Flora MacDonald. He ran away to France and ended his days as a very sort of angry and unpleasant alcoholic in Rome. What happened after that in the Highlands was much more tragic. Basically, the government decided they'd had enough of rebellious Highland uprisings, and they were going to quash the Highlands. They built, they sent a lot of the British Army there. They built forts like Fort Augustus, Fort George, Fort William. They banned the bagpipes. They banned the Gaelic language. They banned any sort of form of Highland pride. They completely clamped down on the culture, and they removed a lot of the clan chiefs, and they broke up a lot of the communities. And it was the beginning of the end, really, for the Highland communities. You can see Outlander. This is a very romanticized idea of the Jacobite rebellions. I'm very sorry to anybody who is a staunch Jacobite, by the way. I'm neutral. I'm entirely neutral. Outlander, but you can see why it's an easy situation to romanticize, but like all things politically, historically, it's more complicated than that. And Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson, another very romanticized version of these events. But it was a great, great tragedy, particularly, as always, for people like the poor people that had to go and fight and often die. Anyway, when you go to Culloden, you must go to the battle centre. It's an absolutely fantastic visit and very tragic, and you get the whole story spelled out for you. It's a brilliant, brilliant visit. I highly recommend it. And the Highland clearances were the period, the 150, 160 years that followed the Battle of Culloden, when basically all the essentially peasants who had lived in the Highlands basically eventually left the Highlands, partly because they were often the lords who owned the land basically replaced them with sheep, and they found other ways to commodify the land that they found more lucrative. And also a lot of them left in search of a better life. So it was at this time that so many people in Scotland left, primarily to Canada. Canada was the #1 destination, also America, some of them to Australia, also a lot of them to down south, to Glasgow, Edinburgh, London, Manchester. It was the birth of the Industrial Revolution. So that was when they moved, and it was a very tragic time in Scotland's history, and the Highland community and culture was broken up at that time, never to recover. Okay, we're going to head through Inverness very swiftly. As I say, it's not the most attractive city, in my opinion. Again, apologies to people from Inverness. But we're going to head down south to Inverness to something much more exciting called Loch Ness, which I know you've heard of because you've all heard of the monster in Loch Ness. Now, I've never seen the monster, so I can't say whether it's true or not. I choose to suspend my disbelief. But what is really exciting is the lake, Loch Ness. For those of you that don't know, the word loch just means lake. It's the Scottish word for lake. Loch is easy to say. You just get the back of your tongue and put it against the back of the roof of your mouth. Loch, ochai, the new. Loch Ness is a spectacular freshwater lake. It's about 23 miles long. It's about 52 feet above sea level, and it's up to 800 feet deep in certain places. It's incredibly deep. I've swam in Loch Ness, and it's very scary. You basically shuffle out to the edge of a plateau, and then it drops for, I mean, it's actually quite scary. But there is more water, more fresh water in Loch Ness than there is in all the other lakes in England, Scotland, and Wales combined. Okay, so it's a huge body of water, and that's also why people they can't really conclusively say there isn't a monster, because it's so deep and there's so many underground caves and things. They don't really know. This is Urquhart Castle, which is a beautiful castle which is just situated on Loch Ness, home of the Urquhart clan. And people that want to see Nessie, most of the sightings happen around the castle here. Okay. The first recorded sighting of Nessie was this guy, Saint Columba, in the 500s AD. He came over to Scotland from Ireland to convert the Pictish kings to Christianity, and there's a record of him having seen a large sea monster around Loch Ness. Then we don't hear much about it for a while, but in the beginning of the 20th century, from 1933 onwards, they build a motorway all the way along the side of Loch Ness that we're going to drive along, actually. And from that day onwards, there's a lot of sightings of this creature that is described as being like this photograph. This is one of the photographs that hasn't been proved to be a hoax. Most of them have been proved, most of the famous ones have turned out to be hoaxes, but not this one. There's been a lot of expeditions to try and find out Nessie. My grandfather, in fact, in the 1950s, came to Loch Ness with some of his army pals, and they spent a few months camped out looking for the Loch Ness Monster. Then later on, sonar technology came in. They did a whole scan of the lake. They couldn't find anything conclusive, but they can't completely rule it out. I was there with a group a few years ago, and one of the guys who his job was a ghost hunter, he spotted the Loch Ness Monster and took photographs of it and had it published in a very reputable website. There's Loch Ness. Now, next on our trip, we would normally head down to Ben Nevis, where it says Ben Nevis, but because this isn't a real trip, it's a virtual one, it means we can actually just suddenly veer off and head to the Hebrides, which are these islands here. You see the Inner Hebrides and the Outer Hebrides. But on the way to the Isle of Skye, where we're going to go first, I want to show you this place that some of you are going to be excited about. This is called Glen Finnan, okay? And this is the Jacobite monument. This is where Bonnie Prince Charlie landed in Scotland, and his first Highland regiment greeted him, and he raised the Jacobite standard. So that's what that monument celebrates. And probably more exciting for some of you, just around the corner is this. That's right, it's the Glen Finnan Viaduct. And that train is called the Jacobite Express. It travels all year round, and it goes from Fort William further up north. But lots of you will recognize this from the Harry Potter films. I think it's the Hogwarts Express goes along it in the films. Very exciting. Onwards to the islands. The Isle of Skye is probably the most famous of the Hebrides, and the Hebrides are absolutely beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. If you go to Scotland and you go to the Highlands, you must go to the islands, okay? The Isle of Skye is easy to get to. There's a bridge to go there. You can drive across the bridge. The other ones, you have to get a boat. It's a little bit more complicated. But as you can see, the islands, it looks like something from Lord of the Rings. It's absolutely incredible. You've got beautiful beaches. You've got little towns like this. This is Portree and the Isle of Skye. On other islands, you have beautiful beaches like this. Absolutely incredible scenery. Obviously, the weather's not always this nice, but you have to go to the islands. So there's so many of them. Lewis, you see Lewis up to the north. That's where Donald Trump's mother comes from. And further down, you have Mull. There's a very famous island off Mull called Iona. Iona is very important in the history of Christianity in the UK, because that's where Saint Columba, who we talked about a minute ago, came from Ireland, and he built a monastery there, and it's Scotland's holy isle. And you can get to it from Mull. You can travel across by boat, and it's incredible. And there's still a monastery there, and people go there for retreats. And it's very, very special place indeed. I would highly recommend going to Iona. One thing I would say about the Hebrides is they have a reputation in Scotland for being a little bit wacky. Okay, so a lot of the islands are very, what we call Presbyterian, which is a very severe form of Protestantism. So for example, if on the Isle of Lewis, you make the mistake of washing your clothes on Sunday and you hang your clothes out on the line, you will get told off by the locals, because they take that sort of thing very seriously. I don't know if you've seen the movie Footloose, but it's a little bit like that, basically. No singing, no dancing, not much fun. some great movies about the Hebrides. This is the best one. Well, this is one of the best ones. Whiskey Galore. It's a brilliant, brilliant film. It's black and white, but don't let that put you off, young people. It's about basically an island. It's based on the Isle of Barra, and it's during the Second World War, and a shipment of whiskey, which is being rationed for America, gets washed up on the shore, and all the locals who haven't had any whiskey for the whole of the war, they basically hide the whiskey and then drink it, get very drunk, and then try and hide it from the customs officer who comes over. It's very funny. Check it out. Also, this one, The Wicker Man, not so funny. This is a horror movie, but it's also set on one of the Hebridean islands, and this is about like a crazy sort of pagan cult. It's brilliant. It's a great film for those of you old enough. Also set on the Hebridean Islands, but you'll get the theme from the two films about what people think about the islands. Anyway, beautiful. You must visit the islands. Okay, back to our original tour. We're going to go down Loch Ness, and we're going to head to this town, Fort William. Fort William, like Inverness, isn't very beautiful, but it's a good place to drive through in order to get to our next stop, which is this, Ben Nevis. It's the highest mountain in the UK. You can get up and down it in a day. I did it not that long ago. And Ben Nevis is a mountain in Scotland that we call a Munro. Munro is any mountain over 3,000 feet. And in Scotland, something that people like to do in their free time is what we call Munro bagging. Okay, Munro bagging basically means how many Munros you can climb up in your lifetime. I am not doing very well. I've probably got 10 if I'm lucky. Okay, but I'm intending to increase that. And from Ben Nevis, we're going to head back down south, the west coast of the Highlands. Okay, now this, in my opinion, is the most impressive part of the Highlands. Is this incredible valley, which is called Glen Coe, which is south from Ben Nevis as you're heading back down the west coast, and it looks like this. Okay, and this is it on a nice day. Okay, sometimes I've been there in bad weather, and it can be a very brutal landscape, but it's really awe-inspiring, and it's about as Scottish and Highland as it gets. Glencoe. Here's some more photographs. These are three very famous mountains called the Three Sisters in Glencoe, and it's a long valley. I'm going to tell you one more historical story about the Highlands of Scotland, and that's a very famous incident called the Glencoe Massacre, which took place in 1692, and it was after the first Jacobite rebellion. King William of Orange, the Dutch Protestant king, who became the English king, basically he'd had enough of all the clan chieftains rebelling against him. So he basically demanded that they all signed an oath of loyalty to the English crown. And he said to the clan chieftains, if you don't get this declaration, this of loyalty, sent in by a certain date, I'm going to exact punishment. And in those days, punishment was severe. So they all the clans signed it. The MacDonalds lived in Glencoe, in a small village at one end of the valley of Glencoe, and they were something like 1 day late. Their messenger was 1 day late getting their declaration into the king's agent in Edinburgh. And the king's agent was the head of the Campbell clan, and he decided he was going to make an example of the MacDonalds. So the Campbells, who were basically loyal to the English crown, he sent a small party up to Glencoe. And in those days, the clans had this sort of code of honor whereby they would put each other up and look after each other. And the Campbells stayed with the MacDonalds, and they stayed up all night, probably drinking and eating and feasting. And in the night, they let the English soldiers in, and they slaughtered 30 of the MacDonalds in their sleep. And the rest of the MacDonalds fled into the mountains of Glencoe, which was in February as well, 13th of February, which is probably the coldest time of year in Scotland. And lots of other people perished in the mountains. So it was a complete betrayal by the Campbells of their MacDonald brethren, which is why sometimes, depending who you talk to, people are still rude about people with the surname Campbell in Scotland. So not very popular in Scotland. I apologize to anybody listen to this with the surname Campbell. I assure you, I have no grudges against Campbells. I am friends with lots of people with the surname Campbell. Things move on, right? Okay. Next, we are going to head back down south, and we're going to head down this route past Loch Lomond, and we're going to drive down it. But another very popular way of doing this route is walking it. There's a very famous walking route called the West Highland Way, which is a beautiful way of walking. You can walk basically from Fort William all the way down to nearly Glasgow, and it takes about a week. You can do it the quick way and camp wild. You can just camp out in the heather, or you can stay in hotels. It's a very popular thing to do. I did it last summer, in fact, with my father. For proof, here's a photograph. That's me and my dad doing the West Highland Way. And this is the route here. And it's, if any of you fancy a slightly challenging Scottish holiday, you should do the West Highland Way. It's a fantastic way to spend a week. The only thing I would say is if you do it in the summer, in the Highlands of Scotland, we have midges, okay, what you probably call gnats, these little insects that bite, and they're particularly brutal in the Highlands of Scotland, but that's about it. It's a fantastic way to see the Highlands of Scotland. It's some of the most beautiful scenery. You see Glencoe, Loch Lomond down at the bottom. This is Loch Lomond, probably the second most famous loch in Scotland. Some of you may know the famous song, the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. I'll take the high road and you'll take the low road, and I'll be in Scotland before you. For me and my true love will never meet again on the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. And that's probably another song that was written in the 19th century when people were starting to get sentimental about the Highlands and the idea of Scottishness in Scotland. But Loch Lomond is a fantastic place to go. In fact, lots of people in Scotland go there for their summer holidays. As you can swim in it. It's you can see all these islands down at the far end of the lake. They're beautiful to visit as well. Believe it or not, one of those islands is a nudist colony. It's not a, Scotland wouldn't be my first choice of destination for a nudist holiday, I've got to say, but some people like it. And that's Loch Lomond. And then once you get beyond Loch Lomond, you're back in the lowlands of Scotland. And you can see from Loch Lomond, you're right, basically back in Glasgow, in the Central Belt, which brings us to the end of our tour. How did I do for time? How much did I overrun? Oh, quite a lot. Okay, I'm sorry about overrunning, but please, Q&A, any questions you have. Look, here's Glasgow at the end of the line, where you can get back to the airport and fly back to America and hopefully not have to quarantine for too long when you get back. Thank you so much. Please ask me any questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
George, that was awesome. And I think you are right on the money. It's about 1 minute to 6. So you are really close to just being there in the hour time slot. I have obviously more time planned because we have an entirely energetic Q&A that is coming to fruition. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at the questions. If you don't mind, we'll start at the top and we'll sort of go through them as best we can. They're coming in tenfold. I want to thank you again, George, for bringing us on this tour to the Highlands. I know that we have just touched it briefly, and there will be plenty of questions to deal with the extended areas and all of the information that you gave us. So thank you very much. And again, thank you to the audience, because without you, these tours would really not be great. I mean, George and I enjoy each other's company and we could talk to each other forever about the Scottish Highlands, but it's the audience that makes the purpose of the tours real. So thank you. And again, if you choose to leave George a tip, if he was worthy of a tip tonight, please use the means in the chat and or what's up on the slide. You can Venmo me, PayPal me, send me a check, or even credit card is available on our site now. So thank you, George, for putting all this together. I'm going to hand it back over to you and help you through the Q&A if you are ready to go that route. Are you ready, George? Have you checked it out?
I have checked it out, Mara. Obviously, there's a lot of questions here, so I'm going to plow on through.
Exactly.
Whenever you're losing the will to live, just cut me off, okay?
I certainly will. Thank you.
Okay,
and
great.
Again, you're used to the rapid Q&A, so you just go,
just
go through them and do the best you can.
I will. Look, this is exciting because it's from Elizabeth Urquhart. Isn't that Urquhart Castle on the first page? It wasn't, I'm afraid. It was Eileen Donan Castle, which is near Kyle of Loch Alsh. What is the name of the oldest pub in Scotland? Don't know, I'm afraid. There's a very old one in Edinburgh called the Sheep's Head. Where does one start in touring the Highlands? Would you recommend staying in one general area for a while? What we just did is actually a really good way of doing it, but I would go a little bit further up north after Loch Ness and Inverness, and I'd go to the top to Sutherland, and then I'd spend some time on the islands as well. Okay, 2 weeks, that's what you need. Best time of year to travel to this area. It's Scotland, so it can be, you can be unlucky, I'm afraid, but I would say something like June, July. Fantastic. No idea. I had no idea Glasgow and Edinburgh were so close together. How many miles apart are they? That's easy. 50 miles apart, distance-wise. Because of the origin of the Scots in Ireland, is that why there's a linguistic relationship between Scots and Irish Gaelic? Yes, there is. Correct. That is exactly why. What did the Picts use for the blue dye? It's called woad, W-O-A-D. Curious about the McInnes clan. Starting to research it now. Good, good. How do we find out what clan we belong to? Okay, there's several websites that deal with it. I would, if you just do a Google search, you'll find a really good reputable website, and you'll find out. You don't have a traditional Scottish accent. You sound more British. Well, Scotland is part of Britain. Actually, I think you'll find it's not very fashionable, but it is actually part of Britain. I'm from Edinburgh originally, but I've lived in London for about 20 years, so I've got a very watered down accent. Also, I'm from the Lowlands, which means that I'm basically sort of East Coast toff, Anglo-Saxon. What's Gaelic? Gaelic is the indigenous Scottish language. Was the colouring plate of a family's tartan purely up to the family? I don't know the answer to that. I think it was basically designed by probably the modern equivalent of a graphic design company. What does Fife mean? It's just the name of that area of Scotland. Can you talk about Pitlochry? Pitlochry is a very nice town in the north of Perthshire. It's actually quite a modern town for Scotland. It's like Victorian era, but very nice to visit. Highest point in the Highlands in feet would be the mountain Ben Nevis that I showed you before is 4,400 and something feet. Where in Scotland can I contact to receive more family history there? Again, Google search is your best bet. Where is Ben Nevis located? What you need to do is find Fort William on a map, and then go just to the south of Fort William. You'll see Ben Nevis. Ben Nevis is right next to Fort William. Can you repeat how much it costs to go to St Andrews? On the golf course, on the old course, it's not so much the cost, it's the time. I think the waiting list is months and months long. But yeah, and it costs, you know, probably a few £100s. Is the hair from the Highland cows used for anything? I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid. Is it true that Scotland was largely populated by people from Spain, accounting for the dark hair and fair skin? Well, some people say that about Ireland, that there's a connection between Galicia in Spain, northern Spain, and Ireland. Yeah, so you could say the same for Scotland, because people from Ireland and Scotland interchanged so many times over thousands of years. I don't like to drive on hairpin mountain roads. How are the roads in the Highlands? Pretty scary. You might not like them. Can you repeat the name of the city where Outlander was filmed? It's not a city, it's quite a small town, and it's called Falkland, F-A-L-K-L-A-N-D. Do the Queen's corgis visit the castle? They most certainly do. She doesn't go anywhere without them. How did the tradition of wearing a kilt originate? Do Scots wear underwear under their kilts? I think we all know that Scotsmen don't wear underwear under their kilts. Kilts, traditionally, people from all around Europe would have worn something resembling a sort of big pull around skirt type thing, but Scotland, they ran with the idea, and in the 19th century they formalized it. What's the best season to travel here? Any tours from Milwaukee? The best season to travel in Scotland, as I said, probably June, July, but I'm afraid it's Northern Europe, so you could be unlucky. Scotch whiskies, how do you pronounce Islay? Islay. Why are most of the distillery, why do they have Glen in the name? Glen is the Scottish word for valley. It just means valley. What's the difference between whiskey and Scotch, and which is better? Scotch is Scottish whiskey. It's the same thing. What's the best whiskey or Scotch that you can recommend that's 25 to 50 or 50 to $100? Okay, I don't drink whiskey anymore because you know, we call it the curse of the race in this country. But if I did, I would probably drink Talisker. Talisker is delicious, or Lefroy, but they're quite expensive. Oak barrels or stainless steel barrels? Oak barrels. Is the taste of the whiskey changed by reusing the casks? Yes, and a lot of the casks that they use stored sherry in them previously, and that also changes the flavor as well. I would like to know is there a place to do hiking? Yes, as I said before, the West Highland Way is a great place to do hiking, but pretty much anywhere in Scotland, in the Highlands of Scotland, you can hike, okay? And hiking in the UK is very safe. We don't have bears, mountain lions, it's all safe. Is it difficult to visit Ailsa Craig to learn about curling stones? I don't know about actually going on to Ailsa Craig, but you can certainly see it from Ayrshire on the west coast of Scotland, down sort of southwest of Scotland. Why were they called Jacobites? Good question. Called Jacobites because they were followers of James. Okay, so it's in relation to the name James. Do they use James in Latin is Jacobus? If Balmoral belongs to the people, can it be visited? No, Balmoral doesn't belong to the people. It belongs to the Queen. Everything else belongs to the people, and you can visit. You just need to say that I said it was okay. All right. Will there be a replay that we can watch later? Thank you for this beautiful virtual tour. Yes, you can get a replay on the girltraveltours.com website, and there's all the YouTube of all the different tours that Mara has organized for this entire lockdown season. So you can watch tours for Edinburgh, many different ones. If your ancestors left Scotland in 1855 to come to Canada, what would be the best way to find information about them in Scotland? There's a building in Edinburgh called Register House in Edinburgh, and it deals with what we call matches, hatches, and dispatches. That is weddings, births, and deaths. But also it deals with people that left the country as well. So Register House, or just a simple Google search, how to trace families, Scotland, Canada. There's a lot of websites that cater to it. You shouldn't have to pay anything either, by the way. Do you have stories to share of the Castle Dunvegan, Isle of Skye, the Clan MacLeod? Not really, without looking them up, sorry. Best time of year to visit for good weather and annual events. Highland Games is the first weekend of September. Good weather, as I've said, you could be lucky. Will we make it to the Green Welly? This person knows their stuff. Barbara, you've obviously been to the Highlands of Scotland before. The Green Welly is a very famous service station in the Highlands of Scotland that some people like, some of us don't like so much. It seems a mandatory stop on the way to the Highlands, at least if you start in Glasgow. Yes, Green Welly is legendary. Vantage point for the Harry Potter train. Just if you get the train, you can get off in Glenfinnan, and then you can walk around, see the monument, see the loch, get off in Glenfinnan if you get on the Jacobite Express in Fort William. Is the sailing good between the Inner and Outer Hebrides, and are there sailboats available for rent? I don't know about the sailboats for rent, but the sailing would be very good. It's Scotland, there's a lot of wind, yeah. Where's the picture of the beach stretch taken? That was on an island called Barra, B-A-R-R-A. If you like beaches, Barra is wonderful for beaches. Also, Tiree is another island that has beautiful beaches. Is there a ski resort? That's a good question. I should have touched on that, sorry. Yes, we have a lot of ski resorts in Scotland. We have Glen Shee, there's one around Ben Nevis called Ben Nevis. Glen Shee, Ben Nevis, and a very famous one called Abbey Moor. But we don't get much snow anymore, I'm afraid, possibly because of global warming, depending on your theories on that. The Island of Mull, is that where the Mull of Kintyre is? No, but it's Mull of Kintyre is on the mainland, but it's a long peninsula that goes down the side, made famous by the Paul McCartney song, obviously. When we're not under a pandemic, does George conduct tours that cover all of these areas? How long does it take? Yes, I do. I do several tours of Scotland and the Highlands. I would recommend doing one for about 7 days. 7 days, we can cover it all. Glenn, we've covered. How many days would this bus tour be? Including Edinburgh and maybe a little bit of Glasgow, we could probably cover it in 7 days. Mary Queen of Scots, any info he will be providing? Oh, it's quite a big subject. I mean, she was Catholic. She was 6'2". She was hated by the Protestants in Scotland. She had a very difficult life. Where Paul McCartney famously wrote the song Mull of Kintyre. Yes, that was on the Mull of Kintyre, which is this peninsula off the mainland. But West Highland Way, best time of year, again, May, June, or maybe September, October. I did it in September last year, and it was beautiful, beautiful weather. We don't get to visit the Orkney Islands. I'm sorry we didn't. I would have loved to. The Orkney Islands are incredible. Skara Brae, we have prehistoric sites. We can't fit everything in, but yes, you're right. Orkney Islands, incredible. What does lose the bottle mean? Okay, lose the bottle means basically to lose your nerve, to lack confidence all of a sudden. What's my favorite place on the tour? Maybe because I'm a bit of a history bore, I'm afraid. I really like the Culloden Battle Centre, but that's because I'm a history buff and also because I'm a boy and I probably like war and battles. Are there any rules about camping on the West Highland Way? Not really, as long as you're respectful. How long is the walking trail? You'll do it in 7 days. You'll do it in 7 days. Some people do it quicker, but 7 days is comfortable. What is the sense now of independence for Scotland? That's a good one. Depends who you talk to. As far as Westminster is concerned, they say not for another 40 years, but the EU referendum has slightly changed the situation because Scotland voted to remain in the EU, unlike England. Complicated. That's what we call a can of worms. What would you advise us not to miss in a trip to Islay? Oh, I can't answer that. Best foods to look out for. I mean, Scotland has got a lot of great food. I mean, fish is delicious. Seafood in Scotland is incredible. Hebridean Islands, any good hikes? There's a great hike on the Isle of Skye. Yeah, Isle of Skye's got a lot of great hikes. In fact, there's one where you walk past this famous mountain called the something sister. Can't remember. Is Glasgow a heavily industrialized city? Yes, it is. It's a very industrial city. It's not as attractive as Edinburgh, but it's much more populous, and some people would say more fun, friendlier people. Suggest for a first-time tour of Scotland. Scotland's quite small. You can do it all in one tour. Go to Edinburgh, a few days in Edinburgh, up to the Highlands, one night on in the 2 days in the islands, back down through Glencoe to Glasgow, fly back from Glasgow. You can do it in 8 days. 10 days is more leisurely, but yeah. What company do I work for? I am freelance. These days I work for Mara exclusively, but I work for EF and a company called Trafalgar I work for a little bit as well, and a company called Go Ahead. I'm a gun for hire, basically. What clan are the Turnbulls in? I'm afraid I don't know. What's the average climate? And is there scuba diving? There is scuba diving. I don't know the average climate. Are there small B&Bs along the West Highland Way or just one? Yes, there's small B&Bs. There's very expensive hotels. There's less expensive hotels. And there's also very budget accommodation that you can book in advance where you basically sleep in a more communal area with other people. A lot of people walk the West Highland Way. It's a very popular thing to do. It's a bit like the Appalachian one in America or something like that. Is it possible to go around the Highlands without a car rental? Yes, you can do it by bus or train. Not as easy, but certainly possible. Yeah. Thank you, Dawn Smith. Do you know where the Patterson clan was located? I'm afraid not. If you rewatch the video and pause that map that I had, you might be able to find it there. Have they settled the idea of the building of homes at Culloden? Yeah, they're not going to build anything in Culloden. There was a political issue where they're talking about building some homes on the edge of Culloden Moor. They're not going to be able to do that. How long would it take to drive from northern Scotland to southern Scotland? That's a good question. Okay, so from Inverness to Edinburgh, we're talking about 3 to 4 hours. It's quite a long drive. It's not that far a distance, but the roads are quite small still. We haven't got big freeways in Scotland. Can you speak about the first castle, Eileen Donan? Yes, it's a very famous castle in the history of Scotland. There was it features in the Jacobite uprisings. There was a famous occasion when the Spanish tried to launch a conquest of England through Scotland, and the Spanish army ended up in Castle Eileen Donan. Google it. What was the name of the town area where Outlander filming took place? Falkland, Falkland. How many days does the tour take? Okay, did the Vikings ever invade Scotland? Yes, they did, repeatedly, around the 7th century AD onwards, and they famously sacked Scotland. The Orkney Islands that somebody was asking about, and the Shetland Islands, they actually belonged to the Vikings for a long time. Scotland is partly Viking. It must be said. A lot of our words are the same as Viking words, like kirk for church and things like that. So a lot of Scots dialect comes from Norse words. So we are basically Vikings. What must-haves would you recommend bringing for a hiking-based trip? Comfortable shoes. You know, nothing. You know. It's not that hard, I must say. I mean, if the weather's okay. We've got shops everywhere. It's a fairly civilized country. It's not, nothing bad's going to happen to you. What was the name of the centre we should visit in Cullen Moore? The Culloden Battle Centre. Terry Quam, thank you. Okay, what's the expected distance you have to walk a day on the West Highland tour? I think it's probably something like 15 miles a day is the sort of minimum comfortable walk, 12 to 15. My wife and I did the West Highland Way for our honeymoon. I've heard there is a walking route heading north from Fort William. There is, yes, and I haven't done it, and I can't remember what it's called, but I know somebody that did that last year as well. Yes, do it. When not on a tour, what's the name of the black and white movie set on the Western Isles? Whisky Galore. It's like an Ealing comedy. It's fantastic. You must watch it. How many days would you recommend for an American tourist? Whole of Scotland? 10 if you want to have a nice leisurely time. 7, slightly less leisurely. The lyrics of Loch Lomond, what do they mean? It's about a soldier and his sweetheart, and he's gone off to fight for the Jacobites. I can't remember, but it's sort of sentimental claptrap. How long are the actual on-the-ground tours? Are there different routes and focuses? Okay, Shetland Islands, yes, you must go to the Shetland Islands, but they're even further away than the Orkneys. They're very far. Best time to visit Scotland, May, June, September, October. Robert the Bruce's sites, which sites would be recommended? That's a bit further south. That is more around the Stirling area, okay, where he won the Battle of Falkirk Bridge, that sort of thing. Stirling Bridge. Loch Lomond, is it also fresh water like Loch Ness? It is, yes, it's freshwater loch. 2022, are there any particular hotels, places, Edinburgh area? There's a lot of hotels in Edinburgh. Nothing springs to mind, but I mean, have a look. Edinburgh's full of hotels. I'm a McDonald. Are there particular spots you would recommend my family visit when we go to Scotland, hopefully in 2025? Yes, go to Glencoe. That's where the McDonald clan were based. Glencoe Village. There's a fantastic museum there. Jacobites versus Red Jackets, factual history. As I said, there's a brilliant movie on YouTube called Culloden by an English filmmaker called Peter Watkins. Again, it's black and white, I'm afraid, but it's from about 1967. Watch that tonight. It's fantastic. Have you been to the Wild Cat Rescue in Glencoe? I have, actually, yes. I went on tour once. Yeah, very good. I recommend it. Summer Pass 2020 to the Edinburgh Tattoo. Edinburgh Tattoo takes place during the Edinburgh Festival, which is in August. Yeah, it's like a army military tattoo, the army parade up and down. It's very popular. Biologists go to Scotland for research because there's a high chance you'll discover new species. Interesting. Okay, I don't know that much about bugs and flies, I'm afraid. Isabel, thank you. Brigadoon, what part of Scotland would that be? Brigadoon is about a fictional village that appears during the night in a sort of alternate dream state. So it's not only is it fiction, but it's fantasy fiction. But if you're interested in Brigadoon, the poem by Robert Burns is based. There's a bridge, the Brigadoon, down in Ayrshire, where Robert Burns comes from. So check that out. Do you tell the whole history of the Civil War that happened in Inverness? I certainly would, yeah, but it would take me best part of a couple of days because I would like to give you a very balanced view. I try and give balanced views when it comes to history because that's part of my job. Is your scarf from a specific clan? Yes, this is the Macintosh hunting tartan. Very exciting. What's going on with travel to Scotland now? You're all welcome. Please come. I don't think you're allowed here, sadly, are you? But hopefully that's all going to change, right? We've got a vaccine soon. I think everything's going to normalize sooner than we think. Fingers crossed. Where can we see more about Harry Potter? Is Glenfinnan most of it? Edinburgh is full of Harry Potter stuff. You're going to love Edinburgh. That's where J.K. Rowling lived for many, many years. It's just where she wrote the books. There's all sorts of Harry Potter stuff in Edinburgh. So go to Edinburgh, go to Glenfinnan. That's about it for Scotland. The Isle of Barra. Have you flown there and landed on the beach? I have. Michael Southgate. There's a man in the know. I have flown there and landed on the beach. Yeah, it's got an airport which is on the beach. This small island, Barra. Barra is a beautiful Hebridean island. It's one of the only islands that's predominantly Catholic as well. Out of all the Hebrides, it's a very interesting island. I highly recommend it. When did Glasgow and Edinburgh become part of Scotland? So basically, the border between England and Scotland moved continuously for centuries, but in around the 10th century AD, Edinburgh and around that area of Scotland would have been part of England. But Edinburgh Castle changed hands between the English and the Scottish so many times. So yeah, basically it was constantly changing hands, but the Highlands always remained fairly independent. Could we fit in the William Wallace statue? That's further south. That's in the lowlands near Stirling. Well, it's a little bit further down than Loch Lomond, but not far from there. What types of jobs do people in the Highlands do? Tourism, whisky. Still some people that work in agriculture, farming, that sort of thing. Mail train through the Highlands. Wow, yes, I remember that. Are those local trains still running to Fort William? That is the most wonderful train line ever, yeah, from Fort William to Inverness. I don't know if the mail train runs anymore, actually, but yeah, that used to be a fantastic train. How long in days would you recommend touring so you're not rushed through the country? I'm sorry to rush you through the countryside. Okay, Scotland, let's say 10 days. 10 days wouldn't be a rush. Best pub in Scotland, I mean, that's pretty subjective, but I would say, oh, that's a hard one. It depends. I'm from Edinburgh, so I'm going to give you one from Edinburgh. There's a great one. Again, okay, I'll say the same answer as before. There's a great one near Arthur's Seat volcano called the Sheep's Head. Island of Barra, I kind of said it all, predominantly Catholic, whiskey galore. Google it, it's fantastic. If I don't want to drive, can I get to many of these cities via train or bus? Yeah, by train, certainly. It's a little bit harder in the Highlands, but you'll have a more interesting time if you do it by train, certainly. Can you visit the Skyfall area? I've never seen Skyfall, I'm really sorry. I don't watch James Bond films after Roger Moore. That's my policy. Edinburgh Highland Games. We don't really have Highland Games because we're not in the Highlands, but we do have things approaching that kind of all year round, yeah. Why, being European, do you use feet instead of meters for the height of the mountains? I was doing that for your benefit, dear friend. We use feet and meters here because we're kind of half European, half American. Not American. Anyway, feet were ours originally. So yeah, we use both basically. Where can I get your tour plan? Well, if you look at companies like EF, in fact, only EF, we're just going to promote EF here. They do all sorts of, and also Go Ahead tours. They do tours throughout Scotland. So you can look up Go Ahead or EF tours, and they will have all sorts of itineraries for tours through Scotland, the Highlands and the Islands. What is a sept? I don't know. How do you get to Uist? By boat. They're all by boat, basically. What distillery is your favorite? Macallan, the one that we virtually visited. How can we see the Hebrides? By visiting them or by looking them up on the internet. Are clans based on your maternal or paternal line? Paternal, I'm afraid. What's a good time to visit Scotland if you have teenage kids? I don't know. It depends on your teenage kids. Probably in the summer when it's sunny and they can get out and about. The Edinburgh Festival would be a lot of fun for a teenage kid. So August would be great for teenagers because they'd really enjoy it's a huge cultural festival. So you could do a few days in Edinburgh at the festival and then head up to the Highlands. The Border Reivers or Raiders operated, Chris Barron. Yes, now that's south of Edinburgh in the Borders. The Borders Reivers were these sort of warriors and sort of cattle thieves in the borders of Scotland. So that's south of Edinburgh, basically, the Central Belt, south of the Central Belt. Best places to stay traveling in the Highlands, B&Bs. Yeah, I mean B&Bs or small hotels, or if you're very rich, you can stay in a very expensive hotel. We have them all, basically. Common Scottish name for a female dog, Bonnie. What about Bonnie? Bonnie's a great name. Bonnie in Scottish means beautiful, but it's a great name for a dog as well. Is there public, I hope I just named a dog there, that would be good. Is there public transportation that's best to take from Edinburgh or Glasgow to the Highlands. Yeah, go from Glasgow, get a train up to Fort William from Glasgow. My favorite part about living in the UK, well, there's lots of things I like. I like people in the UK. I mean, I like people everywhere. I like all people in all countries, but I like the people in the UK. I find them quite funny. Berks of Aberfeldy, that's near Perth, in Perthshire, if you remember Perthshire. King Yusi, yes. No, not enough. I don't feel confident enough to talk about it, but I have been there. History of the Gaelic language, same as the history of the Irish language, the movement of the peoples. Any suggestions for where to visit in the islands? Yes, I would go to Arran. That's one of the Lower Hebrides. Go to Arran. Go to Skye if you haven't been there already. Go to one of the really like ones out of the way. Go to Jura or Tiree. Tiree is beautiful, and they're not very busy as well. You don't get many tourists in the islands. It's quite remote. Is it worthwhile to go to the Shetlands? It is, but they're quite far away. But it's very worthwhile. Yeah, very interesting. Best beer in Scotland. If you like sort of fizzy lager beer, there's a nice one called Innocent Gun. That's a nice one. I got bit by a tick while hiking in Scotland. Is Lyme disease common? I don't think we get Lyme disease. Actually, I don't know. I'm not confident enough to answer that. Sorry. Orkney Islands are beautiful and there's a history. Do you include that on your tours? We don't usually get to go to them because they're too far away, but I would love to. Love to include the Orkney Islands on a tour. Yes. Dornoch, the village and the golf course is a beautiful village. Yes, and that's north of Inverness. It's where Madonna got married. I remember that. What are the most famous local foods and drinks? Whiskey, beer, iron brew for the kids, haggis, chips, fish, mussels, oysters. Not so much a question, but an anecdote. Okay. He says, you can't throw a stone and not hit a McDonald. My grandfather McDonald's always said, I'll never say a thing about a boy you bring home as long as he isn't a Campbell. Yes, exactly. Yes. People are very mean about the Campbells still. What's the best beach for a classic beach day? St. Andrews. Go to St. Andrews. That's very nice, actually. Sorry, St. Andrews University. Yeah, for an American, about $40,000 a year. Why can't women play the St. Andrews golf course? They can. They certainly can. Yeah, absolutely. Hang on one second. Bogle. There's a mythical Scottish creature called a bogle that me and my family take great delight in. I mean, that's right, the bogle is a mythological character. I don't know that much about it, I'm afraid. Great small whisky distillery in Pitlochry. I've heard Fife referred to as the kingdom. Yes, the kingdom of Fife, that is correct. Fife is its own kingdom. I'll be 1 second. I can go on as long as you want. Is it true that Scotland is the only area of the UK that had never had anti-Semitism? That could well be true, actually, because I know of several instances in England where there were horrific anti-Semitic events that took place, horrific. And in Scotland, I don't know of any. So that could well be true, but I've never heard it put like that. But you need to reserve in advance the golf course, the old course in St. Andrews. You certainly do. And can we retire in the Highlands? Yes, you can, and it's actually not that expensive either. I would like to retire in the Highlands, not yet, but eventually when I do, that's where I'd like to go. Is it true that Highlanders have Viking blood? You know what? Pretty much everybody has Viking blood. They did a test recently of all the people that live in the British Isles and Europe and things, and basically we're all Vikings. If we were to do the tour we just did virtually, how much would it cost? I don't know. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. You can look it up though. Look it up in the EF brochure. Can I tour Glasgow to Inverness and back to Edinburgh by train? Yes, you can. If we were going to book a tour, how would we ensure you are our tour guide? You can send them an email and ask. You can try it. I'll be honoured.
Private.
Was that?
Hire you for a private tour. That's about the only way to guarantee that you have George. Right?
That's right. I'd be greatly honoured. Please, yes. Contact me through Mara anytime you like. Speyside Whiskey Festival. Yes. Now that is a fantastic whiskey festival if you like drinking whiskey. Yeah, I can't remember exactly what month it is without looking it up, but it's fantastic. Different accents of Scottish Highlands. I mean, yes, lots of different accents. Edinburgh Tattoo, yes, August during the festival. Do the Highlands get a lot of snow? Yes, but not as much as they used to, sadly. Talisker tastes like a peat bog and may not be for many American palates. Sorry about that. That was one that I used to like. But yes, it's very peaty whiskey. I used to like peaty whiskey. Oh, hang on. Accusing of witchcraft. Yes, lots of witchcraft in Scotland. James I, who I was talking about before, he loved killing witches. That was his favorite pastime. Bit more about Macbeth. Okay, it's basically fiction, but it's based on a real king. And where we were visiting the whiskey distillery, it's based around that area. Duart Castle, I have, yes. Where is it? I go to so many castles. Is that, I think Duart Castle is on the Isle of Mull. Is that correct? Okay, I have, in which case I have been to it. Yes, great. I met the laird there, actually, the chief of the clan.
So George, we're going to take a couple more questions, and I think we're going to wrap up.
Okay. To everybody that asked a question that I didn't get to answer, I'm very sorry. There's so many that I can't possibly do them all without, because Mara is going to.
Well, I do think that we have a lot of the same questions coming through, so
okay.
It's hard to figure out if we've missed any that are unique.
Okay, let me look through.
We're trying.
Okay, a few people are asking me about the North Coast 500 car route. I'm afraid to say I don't know anything about that. I'm not very car-y. Best place to swim for vacationers, i.e. warmest body of water perhaps. Good luck. It's not very warm water in Scotland. I swim in the sea in Scotland. It's absolutely beautiful, but it's not warm. It's very cold, but lovely. West Coast, swim in the West Coast. Atlantic nicer than North Sea. Yeah, around the islands, swim around the islands.
Here's a good one, George. Is it safe to cycle in Scotland?
It is. I would say it's safe. Obviously, I can't guarantee your safety, but yes, it is safe. I've cycled a lot in Scotland, and yeah, a lot of people cycle in Scotland. Yes, make sure you stick to the left-hand side of the road, is all I will say. Scotland's People website is very good for genealogy. Lee Fowley has said. Thank you very much, Lee Fowley. Natalie Furtado in Melbourne, Australia. Thank you very much. God bless. Multiple campgrounds in the Highlands. Yes, a lot of camping. Can you explain how to pronounce Edinburgh? It's Edinburgh or Edinburgh, whichever you prefer. Edinburgh or Edinburgh. It's not. The one thing it's not is Edinburgh. Edinburgh. It's not Edinburgh. It's Edinburgh.
So we do have a couple questions about sheep shearing and sheep farms. Do you want to specifically answer to that?
I can try, yes. I'll try my best.
I still am a bit frightened from my experience at a sheep shearing farm from last year. So I'm going to.
That's right. Yes. So where's the questions? I can't see them.
Yeah, they're all over the place. There's just a couple I've seen going through them that are asking about sheep shearing and sheep farms. Do they do specific tours? What kind of presentations?
Okay, yeah. There will certainly be sheep shearing demonstrations. Now, there will be a very specific time of year when the sheep are sheared, but I don't know what it is offhand, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, I'm from the city. I do spend time in the countryside and I research it when I need to, but I don't know the sheep shearing time of year, I'm afraid. But Google it and you'll find out. I'm sorry, I don't know much about sheep. Tell us about the Shetland Islands. Shetland Islands are absolutely beautiful. They are very remote, and the people in the Shetland Islands have a very strange accent, and they use weird words and everything they say sounds like wickety woo, and things like that. I apologize if anyone here is from the Shetland Islands.
So do people truly eat haggis, George? Do people truly eat it?
Yes, of course. It's really, really delicious. There's nothing weird about haggis. It's basically just spicy minced sheep, and it's mixed with oats and barley. It's really nice. It's very nice. There's nothing creepy about it whatsoever. And if you find it creepy, the vegetarian haggis is also really delicious as well. But yeah, we typically in Scotland, we eat haggis on the 25th of January, which is Burns Night, when we celebrate Robert Burns, the national poet of Scotland. And we eat haggis and potatoes and neeps, and we drink whiskey, and sometimes we do Scottish country dancing. It's great fun.
That's awesome. That's a good way to end this, I think. That's
okay. Listen, thank you so much, everybody, and thank you so much for your questions. And really, thank you so much, Mara, for organizing this. It's so nice of her. She sacrifices a lot of her time to organize all these tours out of the kindness of her heart. So thank you very much, Mara.
It's a lot of fun, and I appreciate you and bringing your expertise to the audience. And thank you, everybody, for staying on. We are going to say goodnight, and we'll see you next week as we tour a different part of the world. Take care and enjoy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.